The string quartet swelled, filling the grand ballroom with a melody that was supposed to signify eternal love. 200 guests, a sea of silk and smiles, turned their attention to the top table where my daughter, Chloe, beamed at her new husband, Julian. I sat at my assigned table, not in the front row reserved for family, but tucked away near the kitchen doors. The mother of the bride rendered a guest at her own daughter's wedding. My navy dress felt like a shroud. For 25 years, it had been just Chloe and me against the world. Her father, my Michael, was taken by a heart attack when she was 7. I worked double shifts as a paralegal, my fingers cramping from paperwork, my feet aching from hours on hard floors, all to give her the opportunities I never had. I remembered the feel of her small hand in mine, the sound of her laughter echoing through our modest home. Now she was looking at Julian as if he'd hung the moon, and all I could see was the predator lurking behind his perfect, polished smile. Julian stood, tapping his champagne flute with a manicured finger. The room hushed. He was a master of performance, this man who had systematically dismantled my relationship with my only child. "Friends, family," he began, his voice a warm, confident baritone. "What a perfect day." He smiled down at Chloe, a gesture that looked like love but felt to me like possession. "I want to talk about truth, the truth of real love, which means standing by someone even when others misunderstand." His eyes, cold and calculating, flickered toward my table. A few guests followed his gaze. The subtle dig was delivered with a surgeon's precision. "Chloe," he continued, his tone dripping with saccharine sincerity, "has shown me what unwavering faith looks like. She's defended our love against outside interference." He paused, letting the words hang. "She chose to trust me, even when people tried to plant seeds of doubt with lies and manipulation." My blood ran cold. He was rewriting our history in front of everyone, painting me as the villain in their fairy tale. "In fact," Julian said, his smile widening into something cruel, "we all know people like that, don't we? People who see deception everywhere. People who can't stand to see happiness they didn't create. People who will spin any story, tell any lie to maintain control." The room was unnervingly quiet. He was no longer speaking in veiled terms. He was pointing a finger, and everyone knew at whom it was aimed. "Fortunately," Julian raised his glass, his gaze locking with mine across the crowded room, "my beautiful wife is too smart for emotional manipulation, too strong to be controlled. So here, to Chloe, and here's to all the worthless liars in this room who tried to come between us. You failed." The silence was a physical blow. 200 people sat frozen, the air thick with second-hand shame. I saw the triumph in Julian's eyes. He had publicly executed my character and expected me to take my seat defeated. That's when I stood. My chair scraped against the marble floor, the sound echoing in the dead quiet. Every head turned. Chloe's face was a mask of panic. Julian's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He hadn't expected this. The walk to the microphone felt like a mile. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the cold, hard resolve settling in my soul. I could feel the weight of their stares, pity, curiosity, judgment. I reached the small dais where the DJ stood, looking horrified. I ignored him and took the microphone. "Thank you for that illuminating toast, Julian," I said, my voice clear and steady, betraying none of the tremor I felt inside. It was the voice I used in courtrooms, the one that commanded attention. I pulled the small, sleek USB drive from my clutch. "I'd like to share something with everyone. I think it will provide some essential context." "Mom, do," Chloe's plea was a desperate whisper that carried across the silent room. I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, blinded daughter, and for a moment my resolve wavered. Then I remembered the evidence, the proof, the truth she had refused to see. I handed the drive to the stunned DJ. "Play the video," I instructed, my tone leaving no room for argument. He hesitated, looking from me to Julian. "Play it," I repeated, my voice sharp as a blade. The massive screen behind the wedding cake, which had previously displayed romantic photos of the couple, flickered to life. The room gasped as Julian's face, larger than life, appeared. But it wasn't the Julian at the head table. This Julian was in a dimly lit bar, his arm around a stunning redhead. His voice, crisp and clear, filled the ballroom. "After the wedding, we'll need to be more careful. But honestly, I think your little wife is perfect for us. She's so naive, she'll never suspect a thing." Pandemonium. A wave of shock and disbelief rippled through the guests. Chloe's face drained of all colour, her hand flying to her mouth. Julian lunged toward the DJ's booth, but 2 of Chloe's uncles moved to block his path. The video continued, a meticulously edited reel of damning evidence collected over 10 long, painful months. Julian and the woman, Isabel, his actual boss, checking into hotels, dining at expensive restaurants, shopping for jewelry. Timestamps proved these encounters happened while he told Chloe he was working late or on business trips. Then came the financial records, screenshots of text messages between Julian and Isabel mocking Chloe's trust. "She's like having our own personal ATM," Isabel laughed on screen. The video cut to bank statements showing the money I'd given Chloe for the wedding, $45,000 in total, being funneled into Julian's account and immediately spent on luxury getaways and gifts for his mistress. The final blow was a clip of Julian showing Isabel a jewelry website. "Wait until you see what I'm giving my wife," he said with a smirk. The order confirmation for a diamond pendant filled the screen. "You're giving her the same necklace you gave me," Isabel giggled. "Bought with her mother's money, no less. She'll think it's the most romantic gesture ever." The video ended. The screen went black. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum sucking all the air from the room. I stepped back to the microphone. My hands were steady. "I discovered Julian's affair 10 months ago," I said, my voice ringing in the silence. "I tried to tell my daughter. She called me a bitter, jealous liar. She chose to believe him." I looked directly at Chloe, who was staring at me, her eyes wide with horror and dawning comprehension. "For 8 months, I have been humiliated, insulted, and dismissed, all while Julian and Isabel spent my money on their affair. This wedding, the dress, the flowers, the ring. All of it was funded by the woman you called paranoid and controlling." I let my gaze sweep over the stunned faces of the guests. "You've all watched him paint me as the villain. Now you know the truth." I didn't wait for a response. I placed the microphone back in its stand, turned, and walked out of the ballroom. The clatter of my heels on the marble was the only sound. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The truth was now a guest at the wedding, and it had just delivered a toast no one would ever forget. There is a line that, once crossed, changes everything. It's the moment you realize that silence is no longer an option, that the truth must be heard no matter the cost. Have you ever held a secret so explosive that revealing it would shatter a world? Have you ever been pushed so far that the only path left was the one that led through the fire? If you know that feeling, then you understand why some choices aren't about revenge. They're about a reckoning that can no longer be delayed. Stay with me. The fallout is just beginning. The cool night air outside the venue was a shock to my system. The grand facade of the country club, with its manicured lawns and sparkling fountains, felt like a grotesque parody. I leaned against my car, my legs suddenly weak, the adrenaline that had fueled my walk of shame now evaporating, leaving me hollow and trembling. I had done it. I had scorched the earth. I had exposed Julian for the fraud he was, and in the process, publicly humiliated my own daughter on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The satisfaction was a thin, bitter veneer over a deep, churning sea of grief. I had lost my daughter long before today, but this felt final. My phone buzzed incessantly in my clutch. I didn't need to look to know it was a torrent of texts and calls, from Chloe, from horrified relatives, from Julian. I silenced it and slid into the driver's seat, the weight of my actions pressing down on me. The investigation had started with a gut feeling, a whisper of wrongness that I couldn't ignore. It was my friend and neighbour, Brenda, who had first sown the seed of doubt. Elena, I saw him at the Oak Room with a woman. It was intimate. I had hired Marcus, a discreet and ruthlessly efficient private investigator I'd used for corporate cases. "I need to know if my daughter's fiancé is who he says he is," I'd told him. The first report was a punch to the gut. Photos of Julian and Isabel Reynolds, his boss, in a passionate embrace in a parking garage. It was the same garage where he'd claimed to be working late on a critical client presentation. When I'd confronted Chloe, armed with the evidence, the reaction was not what I'd expected. It wasn't confusion or hurt, it was rage, directed at me. "You're jealous, you can't stand that I'm happy, that I have someone who loves me." The words had been laced with a venom I didn't recognize. It was Julian's voice coming from her mouth. He had been preparing her for this, preemptively framing my concerns as the ravings of a lonely, controlling mother. The financial trail was what revealed the full scope of his con. Marcus, with his forensic accountant contacts, had traced the money I'd given Chloe. The $15,000 for the down payment on their condo had funded a week in Bora Bora for Julian and Isabel. The $8,000 for wedding catering bought her a Cartier watch. He wasn't just cheating, he was financially draining us both, using my daughter as an unwitting conduit. The video shown at the wedding was the culmination of 10 months of painstaking work. It was my nuclear option, reserved for when all other paths had been burned away. I drove home to my silent, empty house. The familiar comfort of my space felt alien now. I poured a glass of wine, my hand trembling so badly the liquid sloshed against the crystal. I had won the battle, but the war for my daughter's soul felt lost. An hour later, my doorbell rang. I didn't want to answer, but a stubborn part of me needed to face the consequences head-on. I opened the door to find my sister, Carol, her face etched with worry. "Elena, my God," she breathed, stepping inside and pulling me into a fierce hug. "The whole wedding, it just dissolved. Chloe is devastated. Julian is gone. He just fled." I nodded numb. Did she say anything? Carol sighed, releasing me. "She's in shock. She's angry. At him, at you, at the world. She kept saying you should have told her privately." "I did, Carol. I tried. Multiple times. He had her so twisted she wouldn't have believed me if I'd shown her the video in her own living room. He would have convinced her it was doctored, that I'd orchestrated the whole thing." "I know," Carol said softly. "I know you did, but seeing it like that in front of everyone, it's a lot to process." "It was the only way," I whispered, the conviction in my voice feeling fragile. It was the only way to make sure the truth couldn't be manipulated, couldn't be explained away. We sat in my living room, the quiet of the house a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left behind at the country club. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "You ruined everything, you crazy bitch. This isn't over." Julian, the coward, was texting from a burner phone. I felt a fresh wave of cold fury. He thought he could still threaten me. I forwarded the message to Marcus. "He's panicking. Dig deeper. There's more to this. I can feel it." 3 days passed in a blur of silence from Chloe. I respected her radio silence, though the ache of it was a constant, physical pain. I focused on the practicalities. I contacted my lawyer, freezing the remaining funds I had earmarked for Chloe, protecting what was left from Julian's grasp. I provided Marcus with everything he needed to expand his investigation. On the 4th day, Marcus called, his voice tight with excitement. "Elena, you were right. This goes much deeper than an affair. Julian's real name is Julian Haas. He has a record for fraud and embezzlement in 2 states. Isabel Reynolds isn't just his boss, she's his partner. They've been running this scam for years." He emailed me a file. I opened it, my blood running cold as I scrolled through. There were other victims: a school teacher in Oregon, a small business owner in Colorado. The pattern was identical: love bombing, isolation from family, financial exploitation, and a swift, brutal exit once the funds were depleted. Chloe was just his latest mark. The final document was a scanned page from a notebook. In Julian's handwriting, it was a detailed profile of my daughter. Subject: Chloe, primary resource mother Elena, high-income paralegal, owns home outright. Emotional vulnerability, father's death, desire for traditional family. Extraction potential, high, strategy, drive wedge between subject and mother. Frame mother as unstable, control narrative. He had studied her, he had studied me. Our tragedy, our love, our history, it was all just data in his playbook. The cold, calculated evil of it took my breath away. This wasn't just a story about a cheating fiancé. It was a story about a predator. And my very public, very brutal exposure at the wedding hadn't just been about revenge. It had disrupted his timeline, forced him into the open before he could complete his final act, disappearing with everything Chloe had, leaving her broken and penniless. My phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Chloe. I took a deep, steadying breath and answered, "Chloe." Her voice was raw, stripped bare. "Marcus called me. He told me everything." A sob escaped her, harsh and broken. "He had a notebook, Mom. He had a plan for me." The dam broke. I listened as my daughter wept on the other end of the line, the sounds of her world collapsing. The fairy tale was gone, replaced by a nightmare of manipulation and cold, hard fraud. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, my own tears finally falling. "I'm so sorry I had to show you that way." "There was no other way, was there?" she asked, her voice small and defeated. "No, sweetheart," I said, the truth of it settling deep in my bones. "There was." We talked for an hour. It was the first real conversation we'd had in nearly a year. It was filled with pain and regret, but beneath it was something I hadn't felt in so long, a connection. The truth, however horrifying, had cleared the poisonous fog Julian had pumped into our lives. The following week, we sat together in my lawyer's office, Chloe and I, side by side. We were no longer predator and prey, or a mother and daughter divided. We were allies, preparing to fight back. The evidence Marcus had gathered was being handed over to the district attorney. Julian Haas and Isabel Reynolds were facing a litany of charges that would ensure they never con anyone again. As we walked out of the office into the afternoon sun, Chloe slipped her hand into mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a miracle. "He called me a worthless liar," I said softly, remembering Julian's venomous toast. Chloe squeezed my hand. "And you proved him wrong with 3 words." She looked at me, her eyes, though red-rimmed, were clear for the first time in years. "Play the video." I had indeed, and in doing so I hadn't just destroyed a wedding. I had begun the painful, necessary work of rebuilding a family. The silence in the car after leaving the lawyer's office was different from the silence that had filled my house for the past week. This wasn't the quiet of desolation. It was the quiet of a storm passing, of 2 people catching their breath in the wreckage, assessing the damage together. Chloe's hand was still in mine, a fragile bridge over a chasm of pain and betrayal. "He had a script for everything," Chloe whispered, staring out the window as I drove. "The way he'd praise me for being so independent from you, right after I'd hung up on you. The way he'd buy me a cheap, thoughtful gift after he'd convinced me to give him thousands for some fabricated emergency. It was all choreographed." I squeezed her hand, my throat too tight to speak. The pie's file had filled in the gaps, revealing a psychological prison so sophisticated I marveled that she had broken free at all. Julian hadn't just lied. He had rebuilt her reality, brick by poisonous brick. "The FBI agent, Agent Miller, said this is what they call a romance con," I said, my voice rough. "They're predators. You weren't weak, Chloe, you were hunted." She turned to me, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "But I let him turn me against you, the things I said to you, Mom." "They were his words," I said firmly, pulling into my driveway. "Not yours, I know the difference." That night we sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd helped her with homework and celebrated her acceptances to nursing school. Spread between us were not textbooks, but Marcus's files. We were studying for a different kind of test now. "Look at this," Chloe said, pointing to a financial record. "The weekend he said he was at a marketing conference in Chicago. He took Isabel to the Cayman Islands. He used the money I gave him for our future investment portfolio." Her voice was flat, analytical. It was a coping mechanism, I knew, to detach, to treat this as a case study rather than the evisceration of her life. But with each document, a little more of Julian's ghost was exorcised. The legal machinery ground into motion with a satisfying, terrifying finality. With the evidence we provided, the video, the financial trails, Marcus's dossier on Julian's past aliases and victims, the local DA's office fast-tracked the case. It was no longer a messy family drama, it was a major interstate fraud operation. The first major break came when Agent Miller called. "We've located 2 of the other victims, a Lisa Chen in Seattle and an Amanda Foster in Portland. They've agreed to testify. Your mother's public exposure, Mrs. Washington, was the key. It gave them the courage to come forward. They'd been living in shame for years." Chloe put the call on speaker, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. What did he do to them?" "The same pattern." Agent Miller's voice was calm, professional, but held a thread of anger. "Love, isolation, financial drain. Lisa lost her life savings, $80,000. Amanda was left with a second mortgage on her restaurant she knew nothing about. They both believed for a long time that they were simply bad at relationships." Hearing their stories was a brutal catharsis for Chloe. She wasn't alone. She wasn't a fool. She was one thread in a tapestry of calculated cruelty. A week later, a subpoena arrived. Julian and Isabel had been arrested trying to board a flight to Belize. They were being held without bail. The news was a seismic shock, the final confirmation that the monsters were real and they were in a cage. The preparation for the trial was its own form of therapy. Chloe worked with a victim's advocate, slowly untangling the knots of manipulation. I focused on the financial restitution, working with forensic accountants to trace every stolen dollar. We were a team, mother and daughter, rebuilding from the foundation up. But the past has long shadows. One evening, Chloe came home from work. She'd gone back to nursing, a small act of reclaiming her identity, and found a bouquet of white roses on her doorstep. No card. She brought them inside, her face pale. "His signature flower," she said, her voice trembling. "He always said they represented pure love." It was a message, a threat, A reminder that even from behind bars he wanted to exert control. I didn't hesitate, I called Agent Miller. He's contacting her from jail. The investigation revealed that Isabel, in a desperate bid for a plea deal, was rolling over on Julian. She claimed the flower delivery was his idea, orchestrated through a former cellmate who was out on parole. It was a pathetic, grandiose gesture from a man whose empire of lies was crumbling. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived. Chloe and I walked into the courthouse arm in arm. A united front. The press was there, but we said nothing, our silence more powerful than any statement. Seeing Julian in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed, was a surreal experience. The charming, confident facade was gone, replaced by the sullen, calculating gaze of a cornered animal. His eyes met mine across the room, and for a split second, I saw the pure, undiluted hatred he felt for the woman who had unraveled his game. Then he looked at Chloe, and he had the audacity to smile, a small, sad, meaningful smile as if they shared a secret. I felt Chloe stiffen beside me. It was his final, desperate play. A last attempt to gaslight her, to make her doubt the mountain of evidence, to make her believe their love had been real and I was the one who destroyed it. The prosecutor stood. The state calls Chloe Washington to the stand. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the moment. She could crumble under his gaze. She could fall for his final, pathetic manipulation. Chloe took a deep breath, let go of my arm and walked to the witness stand. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Her voice was clear and steady. The prosecutor led her through the story. The whirlwind romance, the engagement, the gradual isolation, the financial demands. She was calm, factual, devastating. Then the defense attorney stood for cross-examination. He was slick, trying to paint her as a jilted lover, a woman scorned. "Isn't it true, Ms. Washington, that you were deeply insecure about your relationship with your mother?" he began. "Objection," the prosecutor said. "Sustained." The defense attorney tried another tack. "The video shown at your wedding, a deeply private and painful moment, was provided by your mother, correct? The same mother you admit you were in conflict with." Chloe looked directly at Julian, not at the lawyer. "Yes," she said, "my mother provided the video because I refused to see the truth she was trying to show me. I was so deep inside the fantasy he built that the only way out was for everyone to see the blueprints." She turned to the jury, her voice gaining strength. "He didn't just steal my money, he stole my voice. He stole my relationship with my mother. That video wasn't an attack, it was my mother giving me my voice back." The defense attorney was silent. He had no more questions. Julian's mask finally shattered. He stared at her, his face a contorted mask of fury. The illusion was broken. His puppet had cut her own strings. The hearing was a formality after that. The evidence was overwhelming. Julian Haas and Isabel Reynolds were bound over for trial on multiple counts of grand larceny, wire fraud, and identity theft. They would be going away for a very, very long time. In the weeks that followed, a quiet peace settled over our lives. The restitution process began, and while the money would never erase the trauma, it was a tangible form of justice. Chloe started seeing a therapist specializing in financial and romantic exploitation. We had dinner together every Sunday, talking about work, books, life, slowly rebuilding the easy companionship we'd lost. One Sunday evening, as we washed dishes side by side, she said, "Do you remember what you said to me when I was 16 and Jason Miller broke my heart?" I smiled, handing her a rinsed plate. I said, "Any boy who doesn't see how amazing you are isn't a boy worth crying over." "Yeah," she said softly, drying the plate with careful attention. This was just a much more expensive version of Jason Miller. We both laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt like an exorcism. A month later, the final chapter was written. The FBI, using the information from our case and the others, managed to seize a significant portion of the offshore accounts Julian and Isabel had stashed their stolen funds in. A check arrived, covering almost all of my stolen money and a large portion of Chloe. We didn't celebrate. We simply deposited the checks, a quiet closing of a brutal ledger. That night, I was in my study when Chloe came in, holding a small box. "I have something for you," she said. I opened it. Inside was a simple, elegant silver keychain. Engraved on it were 3 words. "Play the video." Tears welled in my eyes. "Oh, Chloe." "It's not a reminder of the bad day," she said, her own eyes shining. "It's a reminder that you fought for me, that you loved me enough to be the villain in my story until I was strong enough to see the real monster. You didn't just give me my voice back, Mom. You gave me my life back. I pulled her into a tight hug, the first full, unburdened hug we'd shared in over a year. The grief and the anger and the fear finally melted away, leaving only the profound, unshakable bond between a mother and her daughter. The wedding toast had been a detonation. The fallout had been radioactive and painful. But from the scorched earth, something stronger had grown. We had faced the worst kind of betrayal and navigated the most painful truth, and we had come out the other side not just intact, but forged together in a way we never had been before. Julian had called me a worthless liar, but in the end, the only thing that was worthless was his deception, and the only liar was him. Some stories don't have a happy ending, they have a victorious one. Victory isn't about never getting hurt, it's about who you become after the wound heals. It's about finding the strength to stand up in a room full of 200 people and speak a truth that will shatter the world, all to save the one person who matters most. Was it revenge, or was it the most profound act of love a mother could ever show? The line between the two is often blurred by pain. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice to protect someone you love? Share your story in the comments below. Because sometimes, the most powerful healing begins when we realize we are not alone.